My guest today on this episode of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast is Val Walker, who has a recently released book with the really intriguing and relatable title of 400 Friends and No One to Call, Breaking Through Isolation and Building Community. And she's here on the show with me today to talk about this with you. Thank you for being here, Val.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, before we dive into your amazing research and all the fantastic advice you have to share, maybe we could start a little bit by just talking about your background. I know that you have all kinds of different training and professional experience, and maybe we could start there, but also talk a little bit more about how you became to be such an authority on this particular subject, both personally and professionally. How's that for a big, huge question?
I'm ready to
like a
jump
17-part question.
Oh my God. Well, part of the reason I have such a long history of experiences is I've gotten into my senior years now. So I'll say that this is my 6th decade on the planet. So there's a little bit that you gather over the years from experience. So I started out actually before I became a counselor, before I became a rehabilitation counselor. I'm very proud to say rehabilitation counseling, I got my master's in, was such a practical, if you like, really tried and true, very evidence-based way of being a counselor, because rehabilitation counseling was all about building on people's strengths and building a really good relationship with that person. And rehabilitation was about helping people rebuild their lives back into life, building a quality of life. Usually when you were working in rehabilitation, you had people who had had enormous setbacks, such as illness, accident, or an ongoing disability of some kind, seen by society as disabled. And the rehabilitation field was, even before it got more into addictions and that, the rehabilitation field was so much about helping people feel that they could contribute to society, and not only that, but that they were worthy of human rights and access through the, such as Americans with Disabilities Act and all of that. So I'm proud to be from the rehabilitation counseling field.
Should be. I remember I worked for a while at a community mental health center, and I remember thinking so often that rehabilitation counselors and also caseworkers were like angels on earth. I mean, that kind of work that you're describing, I think, is so profoundly important and really focused in many ways the people who need it the most. And not that everyone isn't worthy of having that kind of support, but I mean, such good work. And I'm glad you're like, I'm proud to be rehabilitated.
I found as a so-called counselor, I did some case management, some counseling, at some point for 5 years, I did more psychotherapy as well. So the license depended on what state I was living in. But basically my role, and this segues into why I wrote my book, my role was to be a kind of companion to assist people into building community, people who had been disenfranchised or on the margins or pushed away by society through stigma such as mental illness, homelessness, poverty. We had, any kind of issue where people felt not accepted and different. It was the rehabilitation counselor's job to help them get plugged in to feeling vital in their community and to building support systems. And a lot of my folks I worked with didn't even have a whole lot of family support. A lot of them had been. So I would say the majority of the people I assisted either had mental illness or brain injuries. Worked with a lot of veterans also who had brain injuries due to being in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I basically helped people rehabilitate their lives by finding and building community. So that was, became a diva of how do I get somebody connected? Well, they're
Yeah.
not ready for a job yet, so I'll get them
Right.
working as a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, or
Mm-hmm.
they love animals, they hate people, you know, they don't connect with people, they don't do
Yeah.
people.
Right.
You know, I might have somebody who's really withdrawn or heavy duty PTSD, don't want to do
Mm-hmm.
people. So,
Right.
you know, what are they going to do for a living? What are they going to do to feel part of community if they don't do people? So
Right.
I had to get wicked creative. So that was what being a good rehabilitation specialist, counselor, call it what you like, was working with that person's strengths and helping them find how they could fit into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what an honor that I could even have somebody trust me to
Yeah.
like, well, not only do you have to kind of do the thing with me if you hate people, but I'm going to actually help you find another person out there to work for, or to, you know, help out or feel
Yeah.
that you're connected. So long story made short, once upon a time, this woman at the age of, you know, 58, 7 years ago. Now
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows how old I am. But back in 2012, I had been living in Maine for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'd had a job. I had built up what I thought was plenty of social support, you know, because I'm the guru of social support for all these people I had worked
Mm-hmm.
with for 25 years. So I should know how to have social support for myself. And I had especially a couple of really close friends in Maine, and I had a lot of other colleagues. Originally, I'm from Virginia, so I was a
Oh,
transplant,
me
I will
too.
say. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
cool. So, what happened to me in June of 2012 is I had a hysterectomy and a cancer scare.
Mm.
Turns out I didn't have the cancer, but it was a very stressful, very sudden and urgent hysterectomy that was needed in surgery. I had a week to kind of get myself prepared, and I organized a couple of friends to help me out.
Mm.
And I thought I had my bases covered. So after my surgery, I was lying in my hospital bed the very next morning, and I was groggy and had my IV wrapped around me, and I was very helpless and groggy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my phone's kind of vibrating, and I picked it up and looked at it and went, oh my God, I saw a text from one of my friends who said, family emergency, I'm so sorry I cannot come today. Long story made short, the hospital, even though I had no one to pick me up and no one to help me out for 2 days, the hospital still discharged me at 3 that afternoon. I could write a whole book on people who have no connections who get discharged from hospitals without
I've
the support they
seen
need.
that in the news, the
And
trauma. I mean,
it's
photos of being like on the sidewalk in a wheelchair,
exactly.
like
We
socks
won't
on.
even go there with what's happening with people in the hospital with COVID because they don't have the social support. But to have no social support and being sort of kicked out of the hospital, and I had to
Yeah.
sit in the lobby, you know, and wait and wait and wait. It was a long story. It's a sad story, but I finally
Yeah.
begged of a friend to
Oh my goodness.
um, take me home. And that person didn't even stay with me. I still had to pay somebody to help me out. So what shook me up was that here I was, I thought after all these decades on the planet, after being a mental health counselor, a rehabilitation counselor for over 20 years, and all that I'd built up,
Yeah.
I'd even written my first book. You know, I had built up what I thought was a professional and social support system. And
Right.
I couldn't even find a person to take me home or take care of me. And what was wrong with this picture? It just was something with such a big disconnect. It took every single bit of pride and meaning for having been a counselor for so many years,
Mm-hmm.
and for having been an author of a book,
Mm-hmm.
and all the ways I felt like I was a worthy person
Yeah.
and that I had contributed to these friends. I thought we had give and take going on, and what's with this picture? And lo and behold, I found out much later that one of the friends in particular had a crisis that day, a terrible crisis, with her daughter being in a car accident. But aside from that daughter, she had other stepchildren who were dealing with an addiction with the
Mm-hmm.
opioid crisis.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is part of my realization was that other people can be as isolated as you are because they're going through crisis in their lives, or they're having enormous isolating forces
Mm-hmm.
in their lives. So I started reading research to understand, how could this happen to me? How could this happen to my friends not being able to help me? How can this happen to people? And so reading a lot of social science was comforting for me because I wanted to understand. Otherwise, I was going to go down the pity party of all pity parties, and I was becoming kind of bitter. That summer of 2012, I was feeling really bitter and really disillusioned with humanity because
I could
something was wrong with
understand.
this picture. So
Yeah.
thanks for letting me kind of get into that, because the book really starts from there. And
Well,
I
and
knew I
but
had
and
to
thank
heal
you.
that. And
Thank
I
you
was,
though for like being so authentic and vulnerable and transparent, because what a profoundly traumatizing experience for you personally on so many levels, but also sharing an experience that is so profoundly relatable to anyone
thank you.
listening to this conversation right now who has also felt really let down or betrayed by people that they thought they could count on in
Yeah,
their moments of greatest need. And people, I think, don't talk about those experiences and what it's like in the aftermath and the trauma publicly. And so
that's right.
thank you on behalf of all of those who are like voiceless in that experience to be talking about it and so beautifully. Thank you. And I
Thank
know I
you.
just cut you off. You were about to go on, but I
No,
just
I
wanted to
love
just
this.
honor what you just said because it was
No,
important.
I am not going to do a dissertation on this or dramatic story. I
Yeah.
wanted to go back and forth. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So I absolutely, I'm so glad you understand and can give us the words. See, what happens is you either feel really mad or angry or disappointed in yourself because what did
Mm-hmm.
I do wrong? I didn't do
Yeah.
the right thing. I must not have picked the right friends, or maybe there's something wrong with me and there's a damn good reason those friends don't give a rat's ass. Maybe there's a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is something wrong with my personality. Maybe there's something wrong with, you know, being too needy. Maybe I've made myself too vulnerable. You doubt yourself in these situations where you feel lonely, left out, isolated. You doubt yourself and you turn it against yourself. I think that's very much human nature. When
Mm-hmm.
we're not feeling supported
Yeah.
or abandoned, we immediately turn to ourselves. Must have been something you did.
Right.
And the other thing is, if it's not that, maybe you blame the others. You go, well, she could have had her stuff together better
You can say
and a
shit
little
on this
better
show. It's
organized.
totally okay.
Okay. It's like, I don't, wait a minute here. You
Yeah.
don't just leave your friend lying in a hospital after that and, just no show. But then I understood what happened to her. And you'll see if you read my book. I don't want to spill but there's a really good reason she sort of disappeared for a
Yeah.
while out of my life. And I find out much later. And there's beautiful forgiveness and, but
Yeah.
I'm finding the good thing about reading all the social science research and starting to talk to people about being left out, being isolated, being alone, being lonely. I started finding that, at least when I could point to studies in social science research, I went, I'm not the only one going through this. This is becoming an epidemic. So let
Mm-hmm.
me lay out some of the fascinating statistics that really opened my eyes that I continued to write the book
Mm-hmm.
about. Did you know that since 1985, 3 times more Americans say they don't have a friend they can talk to, about anything,
Yeah.
a confidant.
I'm not
So
sure I have
that
heard
means
that
um,
statistic.
Yeah, that's 1 out of 5 of us has absolutely no one they can talk to about something that's troubling, that can't talk to anybody,
Mm.
like anybody. Like they don't even have a close friend to talk to. That's and back in 1985, only about 1 out of 10 of us could have said that. Now 1 out of 5 of us says that.
Wow.
Another big statistic is that 2 out of 5 Americans, according to a Cigna study that was just last year, was saying that 2 out of 5 Americans say that they don't have meaningful conversations
Mm.
very often with people. That it's sort of like we just sort of take care of business, and conversation's been really shortened, and conversations get interrupted, and like
Mhm.
having those good meaningful conversations just aren't happening as much, and so people are missing them more.
Yeah.
So I would say that 2 out of 5 Americans say they lack meaningful conversation in their lives. Many other pieces of evidence were coming out. I read with the AARP Connect to Effect studies. They did a study of people over 50 and what
Mm-hmm.
were isolating forces in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really helpful for me to understand, even though I had been counseling people with building community, boy, was this an eye opener. And this was a big part of my book.
Mm.
What I discovered is that there's a big difference between isolation and loneliness. Isolation are often, it means a lack of contact. And
Mm-hmm.
usually isolation is inherently something where you're in a situation where you're isolated by a certain force in your life. It could be a socioeconomic force
Mm-hmm.
where, say, you're 22 years old and you're working a lot of gigs.
Yeah.
This is pre-COVID. Say you can't find enough work in one job, so you're working so many jobs you don't have time for a
Yeah.
social life. You're
Yeah.
just doing gigs all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're a caregiver and you're taking care
Mm-hmm.
of a mother with Alzheimer's, or
Mm-hmm.
you're a mother
A
who has a
toddler.
child, yeah, or a toddler, or somebody has a child with disabilities.
Yeah.
You don't have time for a social life. So you can be isolated by being a caregiver. You can be isolated by a serious illness,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, or a disability, where if you're in a wheelchair or you have a hearing or visual impairment, or you have a brain injury, or you have lots of people have illnesses or disabilities that create a lot of isolation in their
Mm-hmm.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
I know that from working as a rehab counselor. I saw
Sure.
that all the time. And they
Mm-hmm.
need extra help getting connected because they, on their own, just were struggling so much to have a community, to have friendships, to have people around. They were so isolated. If you're in a wheelchair, you have cerebral palsy, or you have illnesses like diseases. So, long
Yeah.
story made short, you can be isolated by certain forces in your life. But I looked a lot at the socioeconomic forces that isolate us. Um, and losing a loved one or being divorced, if you don't have a loved one around
Mm-hmm.
close to you, or you've lost a loved one, it's natural when you're grieving. Actually, you don't have the energy to have a social life. Grief takes a lot of energy
It
from you
does.
to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So you don't have the energy to put out there to get out and,
Smile and
make a
make
bunch
light
of new
conversation. And yeah,
friends.
exactly. Exactly.
So we
And
can be
well, and would you
isolated by
say,
a lot of forces.
and I mean, can we also like the whole COVID-19 thing and that experience of isolation, I think has been so powerful. I mean, even for people who are doing a great job at trying to maintain connections through this experience. I mean, the sense of isolation, particularly for people who aren't partnered or who live alone, is
Yes.
profound.
It is very profound.
Yeah.
It really is. It's definitely magnified. There are lots of studies coming out now, very clear that COVID has increased loneliness and isolation for people.
Yeah.
And if you already were one of the folks who were isolated by some of the reasons I was just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you were isolated, oh yeah, 1 out of 4 of us is single, lives alone. 1 out of 4 of us. And 1 out of 3 of us, if you're over 65, lives alone. Okay. That is a huge force at this time,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, living
Mm-hmm.
alone through this. My God, just not even being able to be if you even had a job where you were connecting with people, a lot of us who are single, and I'm for one, I don't have children and I'm single and I'm in my 60s and I live alone. So let me tell you, I don't mind sharing, along with many, many other friends of mine and many other people who are younger than myself, those of us who lost jobs or can't work with people, where we were getting our, if you like, our warm fuzzies,
Yeah.
hanging with people and
From your
feeling,
professional
yeah.
interactions. Yeah, I get it.
So Zoom doesn't really cut it completely. I mean, thank God we have it, but for a
Yeah.
lot of us, we're feeling we're lonelier. We miss the contact. We miss, right, the physical
Mm-hmm.
contact.
Mm-hmm.
It's really different when people are really there. So it's really showing that up with COVID. And
Yeah.
so even people who have a lot of social support are feeling lonely too, because they're
Mm-hmm.
missing the people in their lives, whether they were working with them or they were volunteering jobs with them or
Mm-hmm.
other. So we can be isolated by something like COVID, and we can also doubly, it's like a triple whammy, be isolated by those forces that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It layers on and it
Yeah.
magnifies. Now, what's interesting is that back in 2012, when I went through my isolation experience, it was really hard for me to admit to anyone else that I was as lonely and isolated as I was. In fact, I didn't dare put it on Facebook or anything, that
Right.
nobody had picked me up from the damn hospital. I wasn't going to tell anybody about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
There
We
was
we
shame
hide
in
we
that.
hide our shame, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And I did a lot more study on shame and loneliness. And one of the biggest reasons that we become isolated when we're lonely is that we don't feel we're able to talk about it. There's
Mm-hmm.
stigma around loneliness,
Yeah.
much research on that.
Mm-hmm.
That as a human being in our society, we've been trained, it's taboo to let anybody know that you're lonely, or God forbid you're needy. Like, ooh,
Isn't that
stay away from them.
fascinating though?
Yeah,
Just incorporating other research, I had the privilege of talking recently to Lydia Denworth, who is a science writer who's done a lot of research on the subject of the significance of human relationships and the impact that they have on us. And it was so interesting. One of the things that's coming up for me as you're speaking was her comments about how our need for meaningful connection is a survival drive that is on the
absolutely.
order of thirst and
Yes.
hunger, and that everyone experiences it sometimes
And our
when you
society,
don't
yeah,
have as much connection as you would like. And what
right.
you're saying is that that's true for everyone. It is profoundly important, and nobody talks about it because we experience shame and stigma from that experience.
Yes. And
Wow.
it can make you, especially if you don't have social support. Let's say you don't have much family
Yeah.
around for whatever reason. We
Mm-hmm.
won't even go down there are all kinds of reasons we might not be close to our families, or even
Sure.
maybe we're close to our family, they're just not physically near us
Yeah.
to help us either. If for whatever reason you sort of like don't have anything to show for your social support, we compare ourselves. Oh my
Mm.
God, they've got so much more than I do. She's got the love of her husband, and she's got those kids and those grandkids.
Mm.
And who am I? I'm not even married. You know, where are the grandkids? Where's the love?
And
It's like,
older people,
whoa,
adolescents,
oh my God.
too. I
Mm-hmm.
think on social
Yeah,
media, like, how many
right,
friends do I have? How big is my
right.
following? How many likes did that thing I
Social
shared
media.
get? Compare, but like, I mean, quantitatively, and like, there's agony around those comparisons, aren't there?
So it's easy to blame social media, but there is a definite link that the lonelier you feel,
Mm,
okay, if you're lonely, and especially if you've been isolated, you're going to turn to social media as your only way
yeah,
of connecting with people.
it makes so much sense.
Of course you are.
Mm-hmm.
When I work with really withdrawn folks with schizophrenia and really lonely, withdrawn folks, who wanted to stay connected, boy, did they depend on social media as their major way, a lot of them. And yet you can go down a downward spiral. You become so dependent on it that you start measuring yourself around how many likes you get, and your whole sense of being a decent human being is reflected in social media. So some of us are far more vulnerable to that than others. And I think it's important to say it's not necessarily social media's fault. It's just that when you are vulnerable and lonely, it can magnify all of that.
Right.
And unfortunately, getting people sort of away from that screen, and in fact, getting a lot of people under 25, they're finding in a lot of research that a lot of Generation Z especially needs the structure of what's on screen to help people make connections. So sometimes just doing it casually, like just having a good old-fashioned chat with somebody, just face to face, is harder for them. I'm going to quote wonderful Jean Twenge, or I'm going to recommend reading a great social scientist, Jean Twenge, who writes a lot of books about the younger millennials and Generation Z and the difficulties they have with relationships because of, what technology does to their relationships and their self-concepts. And it creates a great deal of anxiety. So I want to let the world know that even though I'm not that young, I do have an understanding that people under 25 are often very lonely because of the high pressure, the high stakes of building relationships around technology. Right now, they've blown past Facebook. It looks like, it's TikTok and all kinds of other Instagram things. But my point is that if you are missing out on more casual conversation, just natural kind of organic conversation, we get out of practice. And it makes you even lonelier. And I've done a lot of research on this because I worked with people who lacked so-called social skills or conversational skills because they spend so much time alone. It's like your brain it's called plasticity. You have to condition, just like when you condition yourself to be fit.
Right. And that's a big
same
thing
with verbal skills.
Yeah.
You don't use them, you lose them, and then you're sitting there and you're miserable trying to start a conversation with somebody.
Oh yeah.
So if we don't have to practice, we get lonelier.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was just thinking like social anxiety too. Like social anxiety makes people feel more inhibited and like kind of withdrawn in social situations. So they have less social situations. Then when they do make contact with people, they feel like, am I being a weirdo? And then if they like keep withdrawing, they aren't as good at just making conversation and being with people. And it turns into like this downward spiral. Anyway,
it's
so
heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking.
It is.
And you see people getting lonelier, but until you're able to, so how do you talk again?
That's the question.
What do you do to get started if you've been out of the,
Yeah. And let's talk about this because we've been talking a lot about the very real and just the obstacles and the profundity of the impact and how easily people can fall into isolation and loneliness and all of the reasons why. And it's like this hole that can feel hard to dig yourself out of. And I also know that you in that moment, that like rock bottom moment, were like, where is my community that I can count on? And I think there are a lot of people listening to this who are like, how do I begin even to rebuild, particularly in the absence of really feeling safe to go out and interact with people in the same way? And I'm not going into my job anymore. And how do I connect with, how do I even begin reestablishing those connections with others? And I know that's another like huge multi-part question, but like, what does the upward trajectory look like here?
Well, thank you for asking, because that's really what I've prepared I
Yeah.
can take from my book 3 or 4 basic, in a nutshell, ways that not only was I able to break out of isolation,
Mm.
but I found it was a common, those ways that I was breaking out of connection was happening to the 15 other people I profiled in my book from all different walks of life, isolated for
Interesting.
different ways. So let me preface before I name, I'm going to say 4 really solid ways.
Mm-hmm.
Evidence-based, the science is behind it. I've done lots of research. So before I lay out the 4, I just want you to know that I've traveled this in my own life. I've
Mm-hmm.
traveled this for 25 years as a rehab counselor. The same basic 4 things kept coming up and coming up and coming up as to sure bets,
Mm.
evidence-based ways that this will work better than a lot of other ways. So I just want you to know that I wanted my book to have
Yeah.
a chance to introduce this. Of course, I get to tell a lot of stories with my book, but I'm going to boil it down right now to one of the first one of the first things you can do
Mm-hmm.
is just to realize that helping people, just when you're able to help someone in any way, and find those people, maybe it'll be a person who might be lonelier and more isolated than you are.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things I could say is, for starters, if you're lonely and isolated, think about maybe helping out someone who might be lonelier and isolated than even than you are.
Isn't that, but all,
Help,
pain
help
makes us
somebody.
self-focused, doesn't it? It
Right,
makes it
right.
all about us, and it's like so easy to like internalize, and people hate me and I'm worth, but like I love this. It's like look outside of yourself for to see the suffering in others, and
And
to
it's
reach out.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of the reason we don't think we can help, and I really come from this place truly,
Yeah.
that when I kind of flunked Human Beings 101 because nobody bothered to show up and take me home from the hospital, I thought I had flunked, you know, being a successful human being, right?
Mm.
Okay. So I didn't feel qualified to think, how could I help somebody if, you see what I'm saying? What we do is we
Yeah.
stop ourselves from feeling that we can be helpful to others because we think we have to be
Yeah.
qualified.
Right.
We've
That
read
like,
too many
mm-hmm.
damn self-help books. I'm sorry, but I wanted to write almost an anti-self-help book
Thank
that
God.
that was like, no, it's not about fixing yourself. It's about accepting yourself and
Yeah.
saying, even if I don't know what to say or what to do, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be able to show up, and I'm going to help somebody who looks miserable, who's
Mm-hmm.
having a hard day. There are lots of little ways you can show up in somebody else's life and make a difference for them. So if you're in doubt and you feel like, even if you don't have friends, even if you don't like or trust anybody right now in your life, at least there's some people around that could really use your help. So
Yeah.
whether you actually volunteer in your community, or you help your neighbor do something, or somebody around you just needs a little bit of help, it can be hands-on help, it could be emotional or moral support. Um, it can be so during COVID, one of the best ways to handle anxiety is to create a structured, regular way to help people. So it
Mm.
could be that you make a list and you check in with certain people.
Mhm.
Or it could be that you volunteer locally at your senior center once or twice a week and help them get groceries delivered, or you help do checking calls with them,
Yeah.
right? You find something structured and regular,
Mhm.
something that you can do again and again, that becomes like a routine where you're helping somebody. Now, a lot of times, really lonely people, and even myself, when I was coming out of my isolation, I started volunteering, and that really helps. There's lots of online and remote ways to volunteer now.
Mhm.
Get on volunteermatch.org. Yeah,
Volunteermatch.org.
and if
Writing
you're
this
on, if
down.
yeah, and if you're over 50, get on Create the Good with
Create
AARP.
create the good.
Create the Good. So
Noted.
there are ways you can help others. If you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling lonely and at least you could do a little something to make somebody else feel better. There's a lot of science behind volunteering, but not just volunteering. Anything you might do to help somebody else, whether it's a person you're truly volunteering with a job, but it could also be just helping, something constructive you do for somebody else. It works wonders, as they
But
say.
isn't that interesting? There's also almost like a paradox built into that, because like somebody who's been isolated and lonely and suffering, like it's like they want so much to have their own cup filled up, if you were. And you're saying that the one of the big answers is actually this paradox. It's to fill someone else's
It
cup.
doesn't work where it comes to
Yeah.
you. It just doesn't work. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny what happens when you reach out and help somebody. And if you think about it well enough and you go about it the right way, it's usually going to be a person who's going to appreciate it. Okay, but you're not doing it for the
To
big
be
thank yous. You're
appreciated.
doing it.
Yeah.
There's something human about connecting with a person and nurturing another person. That nurturing goes on. We feel it when we walk our dog, or when we
Mm-hmm.
that nurturing and that helping. And there's a lot of science that shows how anxiety, where we're feeling helpless, or depression, helplessness is a big part of anxiety and depression, that when we feel helpful, it counters that effect of
Yeah.
feeling helpless, powerless, meaningless. So that's one thing, is to help others, either through in a formal way through volunteering, or just helping out in your community, or
Mm-hmm.
helping out in your household, and in a structured, regular, routine way. And it's got to be something often that is mutually beneficial. So one is helping. The other is finding people who are isolated by the same things you are. So this is number 2, is look for support from people who would understand your situation. So if you're in an isolating situation plus COVID, let's say you're isolated because you're stuck at home with your little kids.
Mm-hmm.
So what helps is really able to thank God for Facebook, and events and meetings, and you will probably be able to find support groups of mothers going, help me.
Locked in the
I don't want to
bathroom,
make
messaging
light
each other
about
on
it, but
Facebook. Yes.
but it's really important for, say you're a really frustrated mother
Yeah.
who, if you find other people isolated in the same ways you are, other fellow caregivers, fellow
Mm-hmm.
parents, fellow people who have to work from home and take care of the kids, believe me, you will find the communities out there.
Yeah.
And you can, if you like, you'll have somebody to bitch with. We need that person, not just vent, but I mean get down
Yes.
and
Yeah.
we need that to find people who can really understand where we're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us are feeling different and misunderstood and ignored and like we don't matter. But when we find others who are going through what we're going through, it could be that you have an illness, so find a support group for people who
Mm-hmm.
suffer the same illness as you. Even if it's an online group, while we're going through COVID, it's a lot better than,
Being in your head. Yeah.
doing way too much in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So reaching out to others who are going through the same kinds of isolating things. Now, what I found in my book was people who reached out to others who were isolated in the same ways, say through addiction or through illness, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
through being the parent of a child with a disability. People who were really isolated in their life situations, who found others in the same way, built community around what isolated them. There's a really big message in my book that you'll see over and over, that what isolates you can be turned into a way to unite you with
Isn't
others.
that a wonderful message? That exactly what feels like the barrier is actually the road to connection,
Thank you.
potentially.
You said it
Mm-hmm.
better than me.
Well, I mean, it's perfect, and it's such
Yeah,
an important message that what feels like the obstacle may actually be the solution.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you see, when you stop blaming yourself, when you're lonely and saying, well, it must be me,
Mm.
and,
Yeah.
and you look for the force that's isolating you, that's half the way back out of isolation, is to name that thing that's isolating you and find others who are going through the same journey as you are, getting out of that isolation.
Mm.
So that's a big thing about finding a support group,
Mm-hmm.
or finding a group that has the same kinds of goals and cares about the same things you do.
Yeah.
Dare I bring out race relations now, and people feeling really
Yes.
isolated around the
Yes.
divisions in our country?
Mm-hmm.
But boy, I will say, when you have a cause and you're feeling like you're on a track to make a difference in a constructive way,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are finding that isolating forces in their lives, like racism or
Mm-hmm.
prejudice or
Mm-hmm.
stigma. Look at the people with mental illness who fought against the stigma of that. Look what NAMI did, organizations like that did
Mm-hmm.
for people with, those isolating
Yeah.
forces. So unifying with these other groups and feeling mobilized and feeling like together that you can make a difference, giving you a sense of mission, a sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
that can mostly be a good thing, of course, hopefully in a constructive way. So I hope that makes sense. So that's
Yes.
number 2, is
Perfect
to
sense.
find support around that. And that includes if you need a therapist or a person to help
Mm-hmm.
you with your isolating issues, that sometimes maybe before we're ready for a support group, we just need one person to talk to.
Yeah.
If you don't have a close friend or a person in your circle naturally that's around to talk to about the pain you feel,
Mm-hmm.
certainly we know 300%, there's been a 300% increase in mental health, uh, use of mental health services in this
Mm-hmm.
country since March of this year. The COVID crisis has really shown us how much we can use
Yeah.
extra support, because we can't do it all ourselves. And our own families and our own friends might be so overwhelmed, we can't really rely on them either. And so I find it a good message to me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a mental health practitioner, as you are, to see people turning to support. And when I was talking about getting out of practice talking, or getting out of
Mm-hmm.
practice being able to verbalize what
Yeah.
you're going through, because you might be so dependent on social media or technology that you stop talking to people. Well, a good thing about COVID, not only are more people turning to mental health service to talk to people, but also we're finding, I've been seeing a lot of people say, well, before COVID happened, I didn't have as many long conversations, that I used to be much more interrupted and distracted for conversation. Now it's like when I Skype or I Zoom with my friend across the country, my long lost cousin, people I'm reaching out to, I'm actually having longer and better conversations.
Yeah.
So I am seeing some hope around conversation returning, and that's a good thing.
So the strategies that you shared are rock solid. First, you look for other people to help is important, and also find ways to unite around what feels like the most challenging issue in your own life. There are two more.
There are 2 more, and I can go through those a little quicker. One of the nicest things you can do is to make things for people.
Oh.
When you write a card, like in this
Mm-hmm.
day and age, if you can't hug somebody and see somebody, a beautiful thing you make with your hands can show your love, can show your care. And even if you're feeling lonely and down and isolated, when you make something, create something for someone in honor of someone, especially to say gratitude to someone,
Mm-hmm.
my God, it feels good.
Yeah.
And it's a keepsake. It's something that person can treasure. So whether you write a song for the person, or you make a video for that person, or you, send a card, decorate a card, maybe you quilt something for a person,
Mm-hmm.
maybe take beads, make a beaded jewelry for some person. So
Yeah.
making stuff for people, that thoughtful things that you create for others, is an enormously satisfying way to get out of your loneliness and get out of your
Mm-hmm.
funk.
I
Like if
love it.
there's one person on the planet that you really are grateful for, Do
Yeah.
something wicked nice for them.
That's wonderful.
That makes you feel really good. And then the final one I would say is making lists. This sounds really funny, but people are doing it all the time anyway, but I really want to make note of it. You know, all those folks doing Spotify music lists, um, they're thinking of a person that they care about and creating lists for them, like playlists of any
Yeah.
kind.
In
Like,
the 90s,
here,
we called it a mixtape.
there you go, a mixtape. So a Spotify list or a TikTok, or making when you have people in mind that you care about and you want to reach out to. Okay, we're talking about if you're feeling isolated, but a way to connect with somebody is to think about things that they love or that they like, and wrap your mind around that and make lists of, if you hear certain songs that make you think of them that they might like, or Netflix movies, you know, stuff you see that you want to share. So I would call them share lists, where you've thoughtfully put together things for that person. So make things and make and share things. Make things, share things, and the things you share, like favorite movies, favorite podcasts, favorite music, it gives you something to talk about and connect with. So when you're lonely and you can't see that person during COVID, you're sending them things to share, and then you can talk about it later.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a nice, you know, how did you like that movie? And you know, so those are 4 really good ways to stay connected during COVID that were also helpful for me when I broke out of isolation. And it works across the board for a lot of people.
Well,
So,
and they're so practical, and
yeah,
for you know, but like your rehab counselor background is coming
yeah,
through, like very
ultra.
practical steps, which is
I'm
I think
trying to stay
exactly
really
what people
practical.
need. But the thread that I'm also hearing running through all of this, and maybe the big takeaway is that to what all of them are really is like connecting empathically with what someone else is needing and feeling, and then turning that attention away from that like lack into one of generosity,
Right.
and it feel and that is actually the path. And you know, I just think this
We
final
get
thing is so
support, but
important.
yeah,
Yeah, because like I think so much of like what's a lot in self-help around like making friends is, you know, to be fun and to be interesting and to be like, you know, blah blah blah. And I think that sometimes especially younger people feel like they need to have a
be.
job of a certain
That's right.
status or have like some, and and you're saying like exactly the opposite of that is that it really does not matter about all how interesting and amazing you are. It's really how able are you to turn your attention towards
The
someone
other.
else and invest in that relationship, and that is the paradoxical path to building those connections in your own life, if I'm hearing you right.
You are. And
Yeah.
a big message in my book, what I discovered was to get support. It's about giving
Yeah.
support. When you give support, eventually it becomes 2 ways and you
Yeah.
start getting the support. So it is a matter of putting it out there. It's proactive, and you also learn to become an advocate. I've been through loneliness, I've been through loss, I've been through grief. So I know a little something about it. So I'm going to, you know, put it out there and let you be my companion in this journey we're taking together. I've been thinking more of people through this COVID time. I'm really going to bring out the word companion, that maybe we're feeling like we're missing out on a lot of things, but if we can think of ourselves in kind of a humble way as just being a companion for each other as we muddle through these times,
Yeah.
you know, not to have all the answers. Who's got the answers right now?
Right.
You know, we can't see very far ahead. So if we can just be like a companion with each other. I mean, companion means, back to the Latin, it means calm, and panis. Panis means bread. It's the person you share your bread with. A companion is a person you share a meal with or share your bread with. So I like to think of that through COVID, that if you find a companion, you're sharing that little bit of nurturing that bred together. I'm
What a
throwing it out
beautiful
there.
idea. I love it. And
In
thank
the,
you so much
yeah,
for your companionship during our time together today. And really briefly, so Val Walker, the book is called 400 Friends and No One to Call: Breaking Through Isolation and Building Community. And if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, is valwalker.com?
I got it. Well, somebody else had that.
Oh,
so, so mine's valwalkerauthor.com.
okay,
And I
noted.
do
I'll be
some
sure to link to
tutorials
that.
and classes on building a social life too. I just want to put it out there.
Okay.
I'm here in Massachusetts. I'm going to be on a panel with the Council on Aging in Newton, Mass.
Okay.
I got some Zooming going on all over my Facebook page about if there's some events you might want to go to. I'm doing a big talk for recovery counselors dealing with addiction in Braintree, Mass. coming up. So if you go to my Facebook page through my 400 friends and no one to call, I got a page for that. I'll keep you posted on events that you can zoom into and join on some of our lectures and
Wonderful.
whatnot.
I'll be sure to follow you and to
Yeah,
stay posted. It sounds like you're doing all kinds of things. All right. Val Walker, author.com. Facebook is a good place to find you. And Val, I hope we have the opportunity to talk again sometime in the future. This has been a lot of fun.
I
Thank you.
enjoyed it. Thank you.